Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, dear students, dear colleagues. Now we are online. This presentation is also for students and colleagues from other universities. And I'm very glad that I can welcome here the best Czech female economist, docent Dr. Mariola Pytlíková. And it's a big pleasure for us to welcome so excellent economist here. And I would like to say that this presentation is held in cooperation with Czech Economic Society, and that you can send during the lecture, you can send your questions to the link you will see on the screen. So now I would like to invite Dr. Michal Menšík, rector of Moravian University College Olomouc, to say some words about Mariola.
Ladies and gentlemen, here in our lecture hall, ladies and gentlemen over there online watching us right now, let me please welcome you at our University College, and let me please briefly introduce our keynote speaker for today, Dr. Mariola Pytlíková. If you look on the career of Dr. Pytlíková, you can see three things. First, a lot of work has been done, and it seems that a lot of work will be done based on in how many countries and how many institutions Dr. Pytlíková is active researcher. Also, Dr. Pytlíková is active on two universities. One is Technical University in Ostrava, and the other one is Serge in Prague. And last but not least, Dr. Pytlíková is very active on the international field. And by the way, all these while two kids and a partner, so enormous work. And because I know you are not here because of me, but because of her, I would like to pass my word to you. So, Mariola, it's your field now.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this nice introduction, and thank you to the organizers for inviting me. And I'm really glad. It's a big pleasure to be here and to give lecture in this fantastic modern building that one cannot see so often in Czech Republic. So it's very nice. It's a great pleasure. Thank you very much. So I would like to give today's speech on the topic of international migration, on determinants and impacts of international migration. This is my research field where I conducted several studies, and I would like to say something about what we know in this field and also what are my contribution to the research. So please let me start with the, yeah, does it work? Yeah, great. So, yeah, let me start. So today I'm going to talk first about what are the trends in international migration over the period of last 20, 30 years, so that I can give you some kind of context to those studies that we know from our research. The second part of my speech will be devoted to determinants of migration, why people migrate, what are the main factors behind migration. And the third part will be devoted on impacts of migration. What are the consequences of international migration, of immigrants coming and also immigrants going abroad, and what is the consequence on source countries? So please let me start. So what we observed during the last 30 years, there were two significant phenomena driving migration flows over the last decades. The first is a growing migration from less developed countries, and this is very much actual in the context of current migration crisis that you observe, and there's lots of discussion about the refugee flow to Europe. The second big event that influenced migration trends was growing migration from Central and Eastern Europe, from our home countries abroad, and this was a consequence of the fall of Iron Curtain, fall of communist regime, and then also it was in the light of EU enlargement and migration to other EU countries. Given that, we can observe certain migration trends, but it's not so easy for politicians, for us researchers to identify migration, because till recently there was no good international migration data set available. So now the World Bank and OECD, they are strengthening their efforts to gather some international migration data sets. But when I started my PhD, at that time there was actually no numbers really on international migration. So when I was starting my PhD, I started collect data set on migration. I started to contact different international statistical offices and asking them to give me numbers on flows, migration flows by countries of origin, and stock of migrants, the number of foreigners by origin. And this effort was kind of going on through entire my career, and I started to work with a data set that we put together on migration flows and foreign population stock in 42 countries from all world origins for years 1980 to 2010. And based on those numbers, I will show you some of those trends that we can see from those numbers that are happening in migration. Yeah. So first, just when I would put together all the data from all origins into those 42 destinations, you might see that there's really migration on the rise, that we observe growing migration, and you can also observe that there's a decline in this 2009-2010 as a consequence of economic crisis. And this is development of annual migration flows, so inflows every year to those destinations. If we take a look at the numbers of foreigners living abroad, you can see as well it's on the rise. You can see that it's growing, and these numbers, they are showing approximately 80-90 million foreigners living in those 42 destination countries, which makes around 3 to 4% of the countries of origin population. If we would take a look on how number of foreigners that have developed across different destinations, you might observe that the number of foreigners increased over that time in almost all destination countries. And you might see that for some of the countries, the increase was bigger, for some was smaller. You might see that some of the countries, they have really high numbers of foreigners per destination country population. For example, some of the traditional immigration countries like Australia, New Zealand, United States, Canada, they have already some established numbers of foreigners. I might use this one. Oh, no, it's not. Okay. But you can also see that some of the destinations became popular immigration destinations only recently. And these are, for example, Nordic countries. You might see, for example, Sweden, Norway, Iceland, that the number of foreigners in those countries increased quite significantly over those 30-year period. And you might also see that the southern European countries also became immigration countries. And as you remember, southern European countries were mostly emigration countries. There was very big flow of foreigners from those countries. They were mostly emigration countries, but became immigration countries over time. If you take a look, I kind of made it significant in the graph, what is the number of foreigners in Czech Republic. So you can see that at the moment, it didn't really change much, I guess, in 2015 as well, but in 2014, there were living around 450,000 foreigners in Czech Republic, which makes around 4.3% of population. And you can see that we belong to some of those countries as other post-communist countries that are relatively homogeneous, but you can observe that there's growing immigration to our countries as well, but still we have not so many foreigners in comparison with other Western countries. If we would take a look on division of immigration flows by different continents of origin, you might observe that there are those two phenomena that I was just mentioning. You can observe that there's growing migration from these less developed countries. You might observe that on this on that yellow color, that's immigration from Asia that is on rise, and it's the biggest actually source. The next biggest source are actually is our region of Central and Eastern European countries. I call them EU10 because these are the countries that entered the EU in 2004 and 2007, and you might see that there's really a big flow, and it makes around 1.8 million people on its peak yearly. Yeah, that's a really big number. And you might also observe that there's also growing immigration from Africa, although the numbers are not that high still. And you might see that there's rather stabilized immigration from other, these old EU15 countries and from North America and Australia, New Zealand. If we look at the graph, similar graph, but focusing on number of foreigners, you might see similar picture because it's just following the inflows as well. So you might see that there's a growing number of foreigners going from South and Central America, from Asia, and from this region of EU10 countries and other European countries. This South and Central this flow from Central and South America is driven by Hispanic people going to the US, clearly. Yeah, so that's some intuition. Then I took, because we don't have that good data also on this recent refugee crisis, and I have data only up to 2010. I'm just updating the data set up to 2013, but I wanted to just give you insight on the numbers of refugees coming during 2015, and you might see the number of asylum claims in Europe that over 2015 it totaled to 1.3 million asylum seekers coming to Europe. Still compared with the numbers of people going from Central Eastern Europe abroad, it's still, the number is bigger than the number of refugees coming to Europe. Still, it is a big inflow, and you see on this graph, using data from Eurostat, that the biggest recipients are Germany, Austria, Hungary, Sweden, Italy, and France and the UK. If we take a look on those refugees by different countries of origin, you might see that the biggest part of refugees come really from this conflict-threatened Syria region, but then it's also followed by a number of other origins like Afghanistan, Kosovo, Iraq, Albania, Pakistan, and so on. You can see some numbers, but Yeah, but that's really a political issue, and we might definitely discuss afterwards some of these happenings that are happening at the moment. But I would like to give you some kind of insight on what we know as researchers, what we know from the literature, and how I contributed to literature on why people migrate and what are the impacts of migration. I also would like to first, coming from those trends, give you some kind of understanding why it is important for us to understand some of these things. So we know that there's growing migration from these less developed countries and also increased refugee flow. And we know from the literature that these immigrants, they have, because they are more culturally far away, they have more difficulties to enter labor markets and enter societies. They show lower social mobility, skill transferability, and skill acquisition. And consequently, they have difficulties on labor markets and societies and to integrate. The second big source of migration is our region of Central and Eastern Europe, and it has followed after the fall of Iron Curtain. I took this kind of typical picture from the fall of Berlin Wall just to show how big enthusiasm there was after '89 to try the freedoms and to go abroad to try to experience Western countries. So it became a big source of emigration, and also it became important source of emigration, in connection with EU enlargement in 2004 and 2007. Yeah, but given those happenings, and given that our countries are in a really close geographical proximity and also cultural proximity, Western Europe was at that time of fall of Iron Curtain and EU enlargements in particular was fearing big migration, and there was lots of this in the media discussing this migration from Central and Eastern Europe. Therefore, politicians in connection with EU enlargements, they imposed so-called transition periods on free movement of labor. I believe you know that free movement of labor is one of the freedoms guaranteed by the EU. Just to kind of show you a little bit historical development, you know that 10 new countries entered the EU, and in connection with this free movement of labor, there could be transition periods. They could be imposed in total for 7 years. And just to show you what was the historical happenings, which countries introduced indeed transition periods for migrants coming from Central and Eastern Europe, from these new EU countries, and which did not. So in 2004, at the day of EU entry, it was only UK, Ireland, and Sweden that opened their labor markets and said, we are not going to give any restriction for migrants coming from these new EU countries. In 2006, it was it was Spain, Portugal, and Greece, the Southern Europe, Italy, Finland, and Iceland that opened their labor markets. In 2007, it was Netherlands and Luxembourg. In 2008, it was France. 2009, Belgium, Denmark, and Norway. And in 2011, there was the 7 years after 2004, and where the longest possible transition period had to end. And it was only Austria, Germany, and Switzerland that kept the longest transition period. These were the countries that were most afraid of people coming because of the really close geographical distance. Then in 2007, Bulgaria and Romania entered the EU, and the restrictions were again possible for 7 years, so it was possible up to 2014. In 2007, it was only from old EU countries, it was only Finland and Sweden that opened their labor markets. The rest of the old EU 15 decided to keep restrictions. And then also these 2004 members, they opened their labor markets for workers from Bulgaria and Romania. In 2009, it was Denmark, Greece, Portugal, and Spain. In 2012, Iceland, Italy, and 2014, the rest of EU countries. And just to show you what was the development of immigration from this Central and Eastern Europe. So in this graph, you have immigration flows over time from 89 to 2010 by different regions, and I divided the region to old EU 15, then EU 10, which are the 10 new countries that entered in 2004, and then flows from Bulgaria and Romania called EU 2, and then flows from the rest of Europe, mostly the former Soviet Union countries. And you might observe that there was indeed a really quite big increase from this EU 10 and EU 2 in connection with this EU enlargement and also subsequent opening. So for example, from this our region, EU 10 countries, or EU 8 I could call it, because the biggest peak happened around 2004, but then also 2006, 2007. And in the highest number was equal approximately 430,000 emigrants yearly from our region. It's really big. And when we look at Bulgaria and Romania, we can see that there was really huge increase in connection with EU enlargement in 2007. Yeah. So this is just to show you some of the developments. If we take a look on destination country, how this immigrants, the number of immigrants from Central and Eastern Europe increased in those different countries, you might see really diversity. So you might see that the immigrants from Central and Eastern Europe, they went to particular countries. So first of all, the biggest increase of immigrants coming from from countries that entered in 2004 was happening for Northern Europe, yeah, for Scandinavian countries. In Iceland, from almost nothing, the increase was up to almost 4% of Icelandic population was suddenly from Central Eastern Europe. It was driven a lot by people from Poland. In Norway, the same, from almost no immigrants from that region, suddenly up to almost 2%. The second receiving country is Austria, but Austria, as a neighborhooding country, had traditionally was receiving many, exactly Czechs and Slovaks. Yeah, but you can see that there was quite big increase in terms of also shares of destination population. And if we take a look on number of foreigners from Bulgaria and Romania, you might see that they went mostly to Southern Europe. You can see that Spain, from almost no Romanians, Bulgarians, the increase was to over 2% of population. Spanish population are Bulgarian Romanians. And you might tell me if the biggest group was coming from Bulgaria and Romania. Any hints or any suggestions? What do you think? Are those numbers represented by Romanians or Bulgarians? Romanians. Why is that? What do you think? More active? Better English speaking? Fantastic, yeah, it's because of the language, because Romanian language belongs to Latin languages, and Romanians, they have it just very easy to learn Spanish and Italian. So they went primarily to Spain, Portugal, and Italy. But because of that, because of this big inflow, and perhaps really strong economic crisis in Spain, Spain reimposed transition period in 2011 only for Romanians, because it was more, also populist movement, but the numbers were quite big, and Spain did that restriction. Okay, so these were some of the numbers, and what we know, also we know that the migration pressures will continue in the future. We know that there happened really enormous technological revolution, and that we have improvements in communication. We can communicate over Skype, over internet. The cost of telephone and transportation went really down. So it's very easy for people actually to migrate. So the cost of migration went down. We have at the same time also growing centers of conflicts. So also the political migration is really becoming an issue. And also we can say it will continue, the pressures will continue for the future just simply because of the demographic projection. We have on the one hand aging of the populations in Western world, and not only in highly developed countries. And we have growing population in least developed countries. And just to show you some of the projections, so I put into numbers demographic projections for the EU. You might see these are cohorts by education of females and males. You might see that in year 2000, the population was 450 million in the old EU15, and you might see the population was relatively straightly distributed, equally distributed across ages. But if we look at 2050, we might see that we have really less people in those young cohorts, and we have many more older people, and we have people that really live longer because of the medicine, because of the improved development. Yeah, when we look at the demographic projections for North Africa and West Asia, which is the poorest world region, we can see that this is the population in year 2000, where we have many young people, and really the age of the age structure is really skewed. If we take a look at projections made by demographer for 2050, this will be the population in this least developed area, where we have many young people and many people in the active age. Only because of those, just simply because of this demographic projection, there will be migration pressures. And it's in our interest to help those regions perhaps somehow to progress in the development, because there might be strong pressures coming from that. But we know so it will be continuing, and the immigration policy and Western states, they must really, we must really adjust our immigration policy to those, to the situation of aging population and growing pressures. And therefore, we need to know analysis of determinants of migration, why people migrate. We need to really know what are the main reasons, and also what are the consequences of immigration. This is very important for policymakers. Just to give you a quick overview, what we know so far from theories, which starts already much earlier. The first theories were suggesting that people move because of the economic inequalities, because of wage differentials. Already Sir Higgs was claiming that in his work. Then human capital model was suggesting that people will move if the net expected future benefits will be higher than cost of migration. And this is the traditional model that people use till now in order to come to empirical specification. We have also theories that are analyzing migration decision as family decision or household decision, or risk diversifying decision of families. There's also relative deprivation approach, which is saying that if people can compare with their neighbors or with their counterparts, and they feel relatively poorer than their counterparts in the country, they will be feeling higher pressure to emigrate. We have also theory saying that there's a welfare magnet, that social benefits, high social benefits in destinations are acting as a pull factors for migrants, by George Bohas. From non-economic theories, we know from sociology that immigrant networks are extremely important. And immigrant networks, these are the networks of family, of friends, or even of members of the same country of origin that are helping those people to come, and they help them to maybe find a job and go over or pay the cost of migration. They provide them some kind of safety net. Migration networks also, by the literature, are showing that there can be a persistence in migration, even though the economic gain is not so big, but people migrate because they know somebody out there that would like to go and join them. And there are a number of non-economic factors that are behind migration, and these are clearly, as we see at the moment, these are clearly the wars, conflicts, ethnic wars, but also lack of political and civil freedoms that are affecting people to migrate. And there can be also reasons, other reasons, like love or marriage, the family migration, or there can be also just a taste for adventure that we would like to go and experience, to live in other country that can drive our taste to migrate. There can be also other unobservable country differences that drive our taste to migrate, and these can be, for example, factors like weather or cultural factors that we would like to go to see and experience Spain or Italy because the weather is nice and there's lots of to experience. Yet, the question is also, if we look at the numbers, we know that only around 3 to 4% of population, world population, migrate. So also another side of the coin is to ask, actually, why there's so little migration? Why we don't observe more migration? And therefore, the literature is also studying what are the barriers to migration. We know that immigration policy is one big factor. We also know that linguistic and cultural factors matter as well, and that the cost of migration are important. Costs of migration, these are not only the direct cost of what we pay for the travel, but these are mostly psychological costs of losing your background, of losing your families, being far away from your friends and families. You all know this feeling if you are thinking about going abroad and you are thinking that you feel good in you have your family, friends around, you don't feel like going. And these are the psychological costs of migrating. And as I said, cultural and linguistic barriers, and also skill transferability. And after that introduction, I come to what are my contributions to that literature on determinants of migration. So I'll just go shortly through some of my key contributions in the literature, and I will start with the role of language in international migration. This piece of research came actually last year in the Economic Journal, which is very well established journal, and it is a work that is co-authored with Alicia Cera from Princeton University. And how we've been with Alicia motivated to write this paper, we really worked on that paper maybe 6 years. And we started with finding out that we both were immigrants, and we both were speaking, we've been growing bilingual children, and we've been thinking a lot about the role of language that has in migration based on our own experiences. And from the micro evidence, we know that language plays extremely important role. It plays an important role in transferring your human capital, your education, your experiences to the new destination country. And it really is a good predictor of how successful you can be in a new destination country. And there are a number of studies that look at that. And so we know that the ability to learn quickly destination language and linguistic proximity between your own language and the destination language is extremely important because it facilitates the transfer of human capital and reduces, in fact, the cost of migration. So our main kind of starting point was that we knew that linguistic skills and language is important, seems to play an important role in driving international migration flows. So our research question was, what is the role of language in explaining international migration flows? And we looked at the role of language from multiple angles. We looked at linguistic proximity between mother language, your own mother language, and the destination language. We also looked at the role of widely spoken languages. You know that at the moment English is the widely spoken language, the most important language that we use everywhere. So if the knowledge of English is really affecting your destinations. Linguistic enclaves, this is another angle that we looked because we know from the micro-evidence that many Mexicans are moving to Spanish-speaking areas in the US simply because they can survive there without even knowing English and they can function there very well. Or on the contrary, people moving from other Spanish-speaking countries to Mexican populated areas. And we also looked at language-based immigration policy requirements. We used the following empirical model. In our paper, we go from theory, but I won't bore you with equations and so on. So I come only to this empirical model where we have a log migration rate from country I to country J in time t on the left-hand side. And on the right-hand side, we have a number of explanatory determinants, like stock of immigrants, which serves a proxy for migration networks. We have these economic factors that are captured by GDP per capita in source country, in destination country. We have unemployment rates in destination and in origins. We have distance between countries as an explanatory variable to cover costs of migration. And we have welfare expenditure to take care of the welfare magnet. And then we have as well the linguistic metrics, which is our key important variable that we, key important metrics of variables that we focus on. And plus set of year dummies, destination, and source country fixed effects included. And just to explain how do we measure these linguistic things. I told you about the migration data set before, so I'll just skip that and we'll come to these linguistic measures. So how do we measure the linguistic proximity? We build our own index based on the Encyclopedia of Languages. We simply, you all know that there exist that linguists, they love to put languages into linguistic families. They study what is the structure of languages, to which linguistic families they belong to. So we come from that point, from the information from linguists, and we create an index that ranges between 0 and 1, depending on the highest level that two different languages share in the family of languages based on the Encyclopedia of Languages. We define 4 different weights in the linguistic tree according to which level of linguistic tree two languages share. So we have the weight equal to 0.1 for the first level of the linguistic tree. And that means, for example, if two languages belong to Indo-European family of languages, or if two languages belong to Uralic family of languages. Then we have the weight equal, same weight 2 equal to 0.15 if two languages belong to second level family of languages, which is the difference between, for example, Germanic languages and Slavic languages. The third level is more detailed, and here, for example, we have example of Germanic West versus Germanic North languages. And then fourth level equal to 0.25 if two languages share the most detailed family of languages. For example, Scandinavian West, which is the Icelandic language, versus Scandinavian East, which are the Norwegian, Danish languages, or difference between German and English. And once we know those weights between different languages, then we define the index by just simply adding those weights, and we get index of linguistic proximity between two languages. Then we merge those languages with different countries. So we need to know what are those different languages in different countries, what are the official languages, what are the most spoken languages. It's not so simple. In many countries, you have more official languages, and you have in some countries official language, but then the widely spoken or the most spoken language is different. Okay, so that's one measure. And just to show you some results of regressions. So in the first two columns, we have one model that does not contain any controls, just simply having the linguistic proximity measure in that explains around 11% of international migration. If we compare it with just adding simply a dummy variable for having the same languages, you can see that our linguistic proximity index is explaining more than this simply dummy. Then we add all those controls that I was just talking about, these economic factors and networks of migrants, and we end up, this is the fourth column, that linguistic proximity is statistically significant, has positive effect on migration flows, and basically it explains, it says the number 0.209 says that moving from two countries which do not share any linguistic tree to moving to two countries that share the same language will mean that there will be 20% more migration between those countries that share the same language. Yeah. Okay. So I will just summarize those. So basically, this column 4 is saying that emigration flows to a country with the same language as the opposite to the one that with no common family should be around 20% higher. And just to give you an example of that effect, so given that you control for all economic and other determinants of migration, rates from, for example, Benin, which has moving to France, from Benin, that you know that Benin has French as an official language, and this means that the index is equal to 1, should be 18% larger than those from Zambia to France with a linguistic index 0.1, and 6% larger than those from Sao Tome to France with a linguistic index 0.7. In addition to that, our own constructed index, which we spent lots of effort on, we also used two measures that we kind of, once we started the project, we came across that we got to know that there are actually some measures by linguists on linguistic proximity. And one of them is proximity constructed by linguists Diane and others. That is based on proximity between samples of words. But this linguistic index is only existing for Indo-European languages, so we have many less observations because, as you know, we have migration between 42 destinations and all world countries, so we have many more languages than Indo-European languages. The second index is maybe more interesting. It is a distance which relies on phonetic dissimilarity of a set of 40 most used words in each language, describing everyday life, basically. And it's called Levenstein Index and is developed by Max Planck Institute. And just to give you overview, I picked 4 languages, and one of them is Czech or English, and just put what are the closest languages according to this Max Planck index. And you can see that for English, the closest languages that are is Dutch, Norwegian, Swedish, Danish, German. So people knowing those languages, they have really no difficulty to learn English. No, surprisingly, once you come to Holland, to the Netherlands, or to Denmark, you will realize that everybody speaks English. Even the bus driver or the lady in shopping center knows perfect English because it's just so easy for them to learn English. Plus, also they have no dubbed TV, that's another thing. But if you look at Czech, so the closest languages, as you would of course guess, is Slovak, but then also Croatian, Serbian, Serbo-Croatian, Polish. So these are the closest languages, and also we don't have difficulties to talk with those nations, with people from Poland, from Slovakia, but also we understand once we go for vacation to Croatia, we know that we can understand something from the people. So it really matter where do you come from, how quickly you can really learn language. And that's something that we economists didn't realize until recently, that some research is starting to use these linguistic measures to address different things. But just to show you, this was just a robustness test that we use this alternative linguistic proximity measures and using also different distances between official languages or all official languages and main languages. And you can see that for all those robustness checks, we can see that the role of linguistic distance is extremely important, and the results are showing that there's around 20 to 15% higher migration rate from no linguistic similarity to complete similarity. Okay, so that's just a summary of what I just said. So that we have this link, we have this number around 20% higher flow to those linguistically same countries. And these findings are robust to multiply official and main languages to different measures of linguistic distance, to inclusion of immigration policy indexes, to inclusion of genetic distances. And the effect of language is similar actually to other economic effects, such as unemployment rates. Yeah? So it's pretty big and it's really important. And it was not known really until our study came. We didn't know really much about the language. We also looked at these widely spoken languages, and we found that really widely spoken languages, knowing widely spoken languages really helps that people go to destinations such as UK, England, Ireland, Australia, US, no matter how linguistically far away they are. So the Chinese people will go better to the US than to go to Japan, although according to this linguistic similarity, they would better go to Japan, but they prefer to go to the US, also based on language. We also showed that migration flows are smaller in countries which has some linguistic policy requirement at the entry. And then we looked at the effect of linguistic enclaves, and we also saw that countries which has a larger number of foreigners that belong to the same family of languages that speaks a similar language as you do, you prefer to go to that country with those enclaves than to others. So linguistic enclaves are also important. Okay, so that was the project on language. Then I have some other projects on determinants of migration. For example, in one of the projects, we look what is the role of state. And here we have an article that came also last year in European Journal of Population. And in this paper, co-authored with John Palmer, that is currently at University Pompeu Fabra in Barcelona, we looked at migration from Central and Eastern Europe, and we looked at whether migrants are attracted to destinations that give them larger formal labor market rights. So we look at this paper if giving the same formal rights to immigrants matter in their choice of destination. And also, we also look whether competing destinations, if there's any change in the law, affects actually migration to other countries. So we observe also some kind of multiply game of different countries. When they're changing their policy, how does it affect it to other migration to other countries? And we find, so I'll just summarize what we find, that controlling for all other determinants of migration, ceteris paribus, migration is positively associated with loosening of destination labor market restrictions and negatively with loosening of competing destinations labor market restrictions. And we also find that the effects are weaker for destinations with larger existing networks, so it means that the networks are facilitating entry of migrants. So even though there's there are restrictions on the labor market for migrants, they still come because these networks are helping them. And also the effects are weaker for migrants from countries with more similar languages. That's one paper. Then one of my first kind of serious publications was also on determinants of migration, and in this paper, co-authored with Nina Smith and Peter Pedersen from Aarhus University from Denmark, looks at the role of networks. And also it was one of the studies that was one of the first to quantify what is the role of networks on migration. And we find that the immigrant networks are extremely important, and they actually are one of the most important determinants of migration on which destinations you choose. And we find that the network effect seems to be more important for migrants coming from less developed countries and poorer countries and countries with lower education. So those people coming from poorer countries, they often use the help of their networks. But this is very important for policymakers because, you know, once you accept a certain group of people, you have more likely, you will more likely have next waves coming based on those networks. And my recent paper that is just coming in International Migration Review with Cedric Gorinas, that was used to be my colleague in Denmark, but now is at University of California at Berkeley. We studied how natives' hostility affects migration. And we used world value surveys, which is a microdata set, and asks different questions, people about different values. And we selected questions on whether you would like to have a migrant as your neighbor, if you agree with that, or if you think if the jobs are scarce, if you think that migration should be decreased. We use these two questions to kind of create some kind of hostility measure of immigrants. In addition, we also use what are the votes of people for extreme right parties across different countries as a measure of hostility towards immigrants. And based on those measures, we again run a similar model as I was showing you on determinants of migration. We find that natives' hostility Particularly, natives' propensity to discriminate on the labor market reduces immigration to that country. And we obtain similar results when using this voting for far-right extreme parties. So we use a number of measures, and we get confirmation that those countries that are hostile towards immigrants, they also receive less immigrants because somehow the immigrants get to know about it. And, you know, we worked on that paper also like 5-6 years, so really a long time before the refugee crisis started. But this is the common question that I observe in the public discussion among people when they're asking why refugees go to Germany mostly and to Sweden, why they go to those countries. And this can be one of the explanatory answers as well, simply because the German society and the Swedish society, they were known, they were accepting of migrants. They felt they are relatively welcomed, or the societies are ready to welcome them. And they, for example, didn't want to go to Poland or Czech Republic or Slovakia. That, from these world value surveys, really always was coming up as quite hostile to immigrants. At the beginning, I really didn't believe those numbers. I was saying, oh, we are not so hostile in Czech Republic. But now when I see the discussion on the refugee crisis, I'm saying, yeah, the numbers were right, yeah. Okay, and we find these effects of native hostility stronger for EU to EU migrants and migrants from developed countries. So these immigrants actually are really sensitive towards these attitudes towards immigrants. And this is a very strong signal for policymakers, because imagine that we have a population aging and you would like to attract people, you would like to attract talented people to your country, but your country is known to be hostile towards immigrants, then you have difficulties. And this kind of hostility atmosphere is very hard to change, and it's very hard to change the message coming to the world. Okay, and then I have another project that I'm just working, and we are working on it also for several years, and we submitted this paper to Journal of Environmental Economics and Management, which is the top field journal in environmental economics. And this is the role of climate change on migration. I'm working on that project with people from Princeton, and among them, Michael Oppenheimer is one of the most known climate researchers, and it's really also supervising on the part of climate change. For now, we have, as you know, this migration data for 1980-2010, but we also have really rich climate data. We know daily temperatures from different meteorological stations in each country over the years 1980 to 2010. And based on those temperatures and precipitation measures, daily measures, we can construct some nonlinear measures. What are the extreme temperatures, days with extreme temperature and days with extreme precipitation values? And we find a positive and statistically significant relationship between temperature and international outmigration, but we find the statistically significant link only for agriculturally dependent countries. This is very much in line with the literature on developing countries, that the climate change is really affecting them and is affecting their agriculture, and these people, when they don't have places to work, they are moving. And please note that we are using this data set that I just described on this international migration, so we observe only immigration to this developed world. But imagine that this climate-driven migration is mostly first starting with neighborhooding countries, and then if those people cannot find their jobs elsewhere, they are moving to developed countries. So the migration will be definitely the effect will be much higher if you would have data on global migration. Okay. So that was my journal article contribution to Determinants of Migration. I have a number of ongoing projects as well. I have also written several book chapters on determinants of migration. One of them that I consider extremely important is the one that is just got published in the Handbook of Economics and Language, and we have a chapter on the role of language in migration, where we look not only at determinants of migration, but also the assimilation of immigrants, how important is the language in different areas of immigrants' lives. We also have a chapter on EU enlargement and migration in connection with that, in the book by Kahanetz and Zimmermann. And also I had previously some book chapter on determinants of migration, which came in the book published by Cambridge University Press. And I have a number of ongoing projects. And I can, this was my work on determinants of migration. Then then the big area of immigration research is based also, is focusing on consequences of immigration. And to know consequences of immigration, it's very important to know what are the selection processes in migration. And we know, what do I mean by selection processes? I mean that there are coming different people. Among migrants, there are different people, and we economists, we usually look what are the skill distribution. If the immigrants who are coming are mostly less skilled or more skilled. In the literature, unfortunately, I think the terminology is sticking to negative and positive selection. The negative is that the immigrants are low skilled, the positive is that they are high skilled. And there are two competing theories. One is based on human capital framework, which says that people that have the highest gains, and this means young people, healthy, those with big ability, they will have the highest gain from migrating. Another competing theory is a so-called self-selection model by George Bohas, and I'll explain in a while. Both of those theories agree that there's different selection by for different types of migrants. There's different selection for economic migrants. We clearly know that those that are migrating as economic migrants, they tend to be best selected. These are people that would like to go to a country and work there, and they know that they can do it. They have a high ability. These are these people that are usually young. They have this drive to go somewhere, and they are mostly doing well in their host, home destination country labor markets. Then we have family reunion, tide movers. These people are somehow less positively selected because these people are moving because of different motives. But usually because they are moving and they have some person that really cares of them and helps them in destination country, they also tend to do relatively well. Another type are refugees, and we observe it now, and I think there could be more discussion in the media about those different assimilation profiles of different types of migrants that I don't see really much, and I'm thinking about writing something in the public media as well about it. But refugees, this is a group of people that would, in other circumstances, they would not move. They would like to stay at home. But because of those conflicts and wars and everyday traumas, they decided to risk their lives and move elsewhere. So these are people that would usually not migrate. They also are differently selected then. They probably don't have the best skill transferability profiles. They probably have educations that are not so easy to transfer because they are not thinking about the economic gains. They are just running away for better lives to escape death. Often these people are highly traumatized and have difficulties really to enter labor markets. Other selection profiles are for illegal migrants and short-term migrants as well. But just to show you some kind of numbers behind selection, what do we know? What are the educational selection of migrants? I took actually data that are collected globally for year 2000. They come from censuses, the data, and based on those censuses, we can divide immigrants, foreigners, by degrees of education. And I took this division by education, and I also divided different origins according to continents, just to see if this differs, the educational structure differs by continents. And I was really surprised those numbers, because I found out, yeah, there are quite some people that have only primary or no education. This is the green color, green part of the column. But you might see also that the purple one, which is the university-educated people, the share of immigrants with tertiary education, with university education, is pretty high. There are over 30% of people also coming from Africa has university education. This is a very high number, given how big proportion of their home countries have university education. So there's really this story that you have immigrants coming from the lower part of the skill distribution, the low skilled, but you have also many people coming from the high skilled people. These are the people that can find out the information about moving, and perhaps they have the resources to cover migration costs. But we still observe quite a big part of immigrants having high education. And I have last 15-20 minutes, which I would like to spend on what do we know in the literature on the impacts of immigrants, and I have some contribution that I would like to say something to the literature. So we can divide the impacts of migration on literature on destination countries, but also on sending countries. The literature on destination countries is the richest one. Of course, the governments that are receiving immigrants, they really would like to know what is the effect of immigrants on natives, on economy, and so on. So this literature is really the richest, and we don't know much about what is the effect of immigration on sending countries. So I won't devote my time to those sending countries, but I will focus instead on destinations. But any of you that would like to in the future maybe pursue some academic career and do some research, certainly immigration and effects of immigration on sending countries is something that we don't know much. And there's some literature on brain drain, brain gain, and remittances, but there's very little known about it. But we know something about the impacts of immigration on wages and employment, which is the field that is most most researched. And just to show you some of the facts that we know from the literature, so we know that the effect of immigration on wages and employment will depend on the size of inflow. If there's suddenly big immigration wave, we might observe some adverse wage and employment effects. What is very important is the selectivity of migrants. And the selectivity in terms of that we need to know what is the structure of natives and what is the structure of immigrants. If immigrants are more complements or if there are more substitutes for people. And the effect will depend, the effect on wages and employment will depend if immigrants are substitutes or complements. If immigrants tend to be more of complements, the effect on employment won't be negative. On the contrary, it can be positive. And also it depends how open is a given country, what is the integration with other markets. And just to show you some summary of empirical studies, so we find that migrants, actually the literature finds that migrants are, in most of those studies, rather complements their substitutes for domestic labor. Immigrants then do not decrease wages, but rather increase wages of complementary workers. So we observe that immigration is increasing wages of more highly skilled workers. And it also been empirically documented that actually immigrants do not take those jobs of natives. There was also there are nice research studies on immigration from Central Eastern Europe to UK and Ireland, showing that really, even though there was extremely big wave of these people, there were no adverse effects in total, and there were found only some small, moderate negative effects in certain industries. Okay, so this was just a very short summary of that research that is extremely huge, and I don't have time to focus on that, but I started talking about it because I wanted to come and make some bridge towards my own research that focuses on not only immigration, but also ethnic diversity. What is the effect of ethnic diversity of workforces and on productivity and innovation? And here it comes. I think it will be interesting for most of you because the program that you are following is connected to businesses. And in my research, I also used firm data and analyzed what are the effects of workforce diversity on innovation and total factor productivity. So I call it firm performance, but I looked at these two areas. And these two papers got published in European Economic Review and Journal of Population Economics, very well established journals, in 2014. I made a mistake, not 15, but 14. And when I should kind of introduce, we talked about immigration. So we know that there's a growing immigration, and it's growing immigration from different origins, from different areas. In the past, in 40s, 50s, 60s, for example, to the US, there was mostly migration from Europe. What we now observe, there's really this growing migration from Mexico, from Asia, from other parts, from Africa, from Eastern Europe. So we have the growing ethnic diversity in destinations, but we have also growing diversity of workforces in other areas. And this is a consequence of perhaps policy measures that try to counteract population aging that we just talked about also. You know that the age of going to pension is increasing in most of the developed countries. So we have more older workers on the market. We have more older workers in firms. So we have more diversity, demographic diversity. You also know that females are becoming growing base of a skilled workforce, and many females are working and doing their careers. There's also increase in female population among the labor. So we have this growing demographic diversity, but we have also growing diversity in education, because you know that this skill-biased technological change that we are just experiencing for the last 20 years brought us more education. We have more educated workforces, and education is diverse. So we have also higher diversity in education. And also we observe that firms themselves, you know it from management, that diversity management is really important tool for, you know, and it's discussed for such a long time. So diversity management in a human resource economics and a human resource management is kind of really important topic. And this promotion of diversity is really happening. And when I talk in some of the consultancy services that I do sometimes for firms, I know that firms really would like to look as diverse. They would like to have policies that help females maybe to combine their maternal roles and job roles. They also would like to have more ethnic diversity. So in many countries, maybe firms really would like to also be more diverse. And maybe sometimes also firms seem to be under social pressure to increase diversity. But the real question is the empirical question that we don't know much about. Do firms really benefit from the labor diversity? And does it generate competitive advantage? We don't know much about it. So in the research, we focus on the areas of innovation and productivity. And we focused mostly on ethnic diversity, although we controlled also for the educational and demographic diversity as well. And just to tell you some kind of theory that you perhaps know well from the management literature as well, you know that ethnically diverse workforce tend to have diverse perspective and different ideas, and also different heuristics, problem-solving abilities, and therefore they are more creative. They come up with ideas that homogeneous teams would not come. It is extremely important for our academic environments to have diverse academic community so that we can come up with some good ideas and do some good research. And this is something that many universities are now realizing, are facing how to, and they have it in their internationalization goal because they would like to increase the diversity. But also in firms, foreigners and ethnic diversity can help perhaps to extend knowledge about global markets and maybe to develop products, different products, because they know some customer tastes from their home countries or globally. And therefore, companies that would like to maybe compete globally, they need this diversity to understand these different markets. But also what we know in the literature, that communication barriers and some kind of tensions between diverse workforce can be a problem and can bring so-called costs of cross-cultural dealing. And in those two papers, we look at innovation area and productivity area. In the innovation, we look whether ethnic diversity is, or those diversity measures influence propensity to innovate, and also as measured by applying for a patent. Yeah, we use patent data. Or if it really increases the number of patents, or a probability to apply in different areas of scientific areas. And in the second paper, we look at how diversity and ethnic diversity in that influences productivity in firms. And you know that there's always this problem with some endogeneity issues, so we use some more developed methodology based on IV, instrumental variable methodology, but also based on structural modeling in order to address the possible endogeneity issues. We use extremely good data. We had access to this fantastic Danish register-based data sets where we have entire population of firms and their employees over years 1980 to 2006. And we connected this data, this linked employer-employee data, with firm business accounts so that we know everything about their turnover, value-added materials, and all the financial numbers. We also connect, for the project on innovation, we connect these data sets with patent applications by each firm, how many patents and which areas are sent to European Patent Office. We have extremely detailed data. And we also, in another paper that I'm just not mentioning, we are also studying trade behavior and exporting behavior. Well, but we end up, in this data, we end up with 28,000 firms that we observe over those years 95 to 2005. So extremely rich data set that we have. And unfortunately, I really wish we could have such data for Czech Republic, but we have real difficulties as researchers, although we have the identification number. So the registers are there and could be connected, but we have difficulties to pursue statistical office and government to make it available. But Denmark did that, and there could be done really nice analysis on that. And so I come to conclusions, what we come up. So we find that in this innovation paper, that indeed, ethnic diversity facilitates firms' patenting activity in all those three measures: in probability to apply for a patent, in the extensive and intensive margins, whereas this demographic diversity is more mixed. And we also, when we look into mechanism, we find out that really the creativity hypothesis is driven that indeed those, for example, white-collar, diversity among white-collar workers is really driving much more the innovation than among blue-collar workers. So we really find support to this hypothesis on creativity, but also on a hypothesis on existence of communication costs. But overall, we find that diversity is very important for innovation. And I think this is a very important piece of research also for firms and businesses. Another paper on firm productivity, we find that diversity in education increases significantly total factor productivity of firms in Denmark, whereas ethnic diversity seems to have negative effects on total firm productivity, and also demographic diversity. Well, so we suggest also at the end that firms that would like to really, that need this creativity and need this innovation and turn it into increased productivity of firms, that those firms should strengthen the efforts to decrease the cost of workforce diversity by applying, for example, modern diversity management measures, or perhaps introducing some kind of modern techniques for integration of foreigners and different demographic groups in order to turn this diversity into their competitive advantage. And that's it from me, and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much for your very interesting and up-to-date presentation. I think that we strongly need economic view, because in newspapers there are only politicians and political views. So I think that it was fruitful for you and all students and teachers from abroad. And now I have information from our background that we have 9 questions, so we can start with discussion. First question, what do you think about the structure of labor market in the Czech Republic? How can the migration influence it?
Mm-hmm. So I think it's maybe difficult to know in what sense, how it should influence it. But the population structure in Czech Republic, given the historical happenings that we had, we've been under the communistic regime that really didn't allow the mobility and didn't allow also much immigration. And as well, if you remember, some of you remember, it was really difficult to even move between regions. So the communistic regime kept really people in one place. I think this influenced our minds as well, and the structure in the sense that we don't have many foreigners. We have 4.3% population is foreign, and we have some historical immigration, bigger immigration groups among people. There are people from neighborhooding countries like Slovakia, Poland, but we have also a large Vietnamese group, Ukrainian group, and we have also quite many Western expats or Western immigrants that like to come. And we don't have that many people that are coming from this less developed world, and even the refugees. But how it would affect, I think it's an important question to ask what kind of population structure we need for our businesses as well, and how we want to develop as a society. And honestly, I think some degree of diversity is really important for us as also as society to develop, to enrich each other. So that's my view, yeah.
Thank you. The second question, what do you think about the possibilities to adapt the immigrants? Should it be solved on a national or international level?
What would I think about possibilities to,
to adapt the immigrants?
So how we should integrate, I guess, the immigrants. I think it is an important question and important policy that should be taken on, and coming also from what we know, which types of migrants, how do they adapt. So we should have certain immigration policy that helps those people to adapt. We should definitely have certain information giving about our societies, about our values in societies. There should be definitely very strong emphasis on language learning. It also comes from my research that language is a key in really getting into labor market. And getting the immigrants to labor market as quickly as possible is one of the really key for success, for the success also in societies and adaptation. So these policy measures should really go towards these measures.
Okay. Thank you. Then there is a question from Radek. Is there any world famous economist you admire and look up to?
Who is the most world famous economist that I admire? So I really liked work by, for example, Akerlof about more behavioral economics, and I also like looking or like economists that don't really focus only on core economics, but also balance themselves on the border with some other disciplines. Alan Kruger could be one of my economists that I really like, and I like also David Card from UC Berkeley, that is publishing on similar level. And I had a really big pleasure to spend a half year in Chicago, where my supervisor was father of economics of migration, Barry Chiswick. And it was a great pleasure to have often chats with him, and I still admire him, although he's in quite advanced age. I think he's still doing great with his research.
Thank you. There is another question. Over 1 million of refugees came to Europe last year, and we are complaining about the strain it will put on European economy. There is currently 1.5 million of Syrian refugees in Lebanon. How can such small country put up with so many refugees while big EU can't?
Yeah, so I think that's a very nice point. Actually, we are talking so much about the refugee crisis, but we are somehow sometimes forgetting how many refugees these neighborhooding countries have accepted. And Turkey has accepted over 2 million of Syrian refugees, and so these countries are under really big strain, and they still seem to be doing fine, although they need definitely help in kind of comforting these migrants. But I think that's a good question to be asked for our government, for example. I find it, there's so much discussion and very negative discussion, even from the politicians, about admitting some number of refugees. And given that the small number of refugees that we are receiving and that we should accommodate, I think this is really very selfish. On one hand, we really would like to get the money from the EU, and we really like these freedoms that the Schengen gave us and that we can work with in other EU countries, but we are not really solidar on that part. And I think there's we should take some kind of part of responsibility. And I think also it's important to look, for example, at these figures on emigration from our own countries. You could see how many migrants from Czechoslovakia, Poland, Hungary went elsewhere. How big are those numbers? It's really enormous, and yet we are quarreling about, let's say, 1,000 refugees to admit. So, yeah, that's my point of view, at least.
The next question, apart from language barriers, what can be the main difficulty for immigrants?
To come, or definitely also we can observe that these costs of migration actually are a problem for many migrants coming from poor countries. So what we observe in this in migration, we observe that actually the most of migration comes from middle-income countries. That those poor countries, simply these people are so poor to migrate. So the costs of migration are really big factor deterring migrants, and also immigration policies. They really play their role in restricting migration.
There is other question from Radek. Former US President Theodore Roosevelt said that every immigrant who comes here should be required within 5 years to learn English or leave the country. What do you think of it? Isn't that an issue that should be considered by politicians of EU states?
And that's a very nice question. I really actually agree with that. I think what we know, language is a key really for immigrant success. So fast learning of language is very important. But as you could see, and as I have it from other research as well, it's not equally easy for immigrants to learn English, and we could see this how far away our mother languages are from this destination language. It is not equally for us to learn English coming from Slavic countries than it is to come from Germany. So there must be distinguished perhaps the groups of linguistic groups, and perhaps there should be some policy saying what is the good time frame to learn language. But I think learning language and maybe selection, immigration policy that is selective based on language, I think could be a very good instrument, because we know that people that are coming from linguistically closer countries, they adapt much more easily, and I think that's a good information, and it was a good point there.
Other question, what do you think about behavior of Czech politicians in the question of immigrants in the Czech Republic?
So, well, my point of view that politicians reacted in a not good way, in the sense that they were extremely xenophobic in their talks already very early, and I think that gave this really tough atmosphere, and really started to worry many people. And you see this immigration question is dividing our society so extremely. It's dividing our families sometimes in the views on immigrants. And I think politicians, they should be there to really be careful in what they are saying, and say things based on some facts, and not based on their threats and worries. So I think that introduction to the topic was not so well done, and consequently we are dealing with really growing xenophobia in Czech Republic, which can be even bigger, from my view, problem than really getting those 1,000 refugees. And I think what politicians should do, I think in the future, I think they should be much more talking about it, about the economic consequences and putting things from perspective, the immigration. And they should also try to put a hand to help the EU to solve the problem. And on the other hand, I should also say something positive about the politicians. I think that our politicians really were right in the sense that they were claiming that the border regions of the EU should really be careful in keeping an eye on their borders and identifying people. And I think this is something what Germany and other Western countries a little bit undervalued. And so this is, I think, where the Western Europe should say also to these Eastern countries that they were right in saying that, and there should be more dialogue between them and really try to fast find a solution so that we don't have to give up the Schengen area that I think is one of the biggest and most fantastic projects that happen in this current world, that we can really travel freely and businesses can send their goods and services so freely. And I think it would be such a shame to give up those freedoms because of that.
Mm-hmm. And it is connected also with other question from Beruška. How would you increase the number of experts to write to public media, because it's so important for people to hear the opinion from experts in this topic?
Yeah, so I think also it's partly on the experts that they should maybe to be able to be available more. So it's also coming to me. But sometimes this combination of the family and work, it can be difficult. But I think the Czech TV is doing quite well in getting some experts. But I definitely think on the in Czech Republic we need more expert discussion. And I don't know. I think the media could be also, the journalists could be more active in finding experts, because I think we have those experts. We know, and there are also international experts that could be contacted. And as far as I know, I think researchers and experts are often really, they would like to inform, they would like to be more active on that. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And there is one personal question. Thank you very much for interesting presentation. I have a question. How do you relax? Do you have any favorite musicians and novelists?
Okay, so that's a nice question. Sometimes I think I could relax more than I do. I think there's not so much space. I really feel like in this period of life, I'm in this really train that goes extremely fast, and there's not so much space for myself. But I think I gain a lot of energy from my children. I think I really appreciate having them, and I know this is a period of life where I have them and I take energy from being with them. But there's not so much time for myself. Otherwise, if I could have more time, I like to do yoga, and I like running, and I do like listening to different kinds of music. So. Yeah.
Thank you. And the last question, Beruška again. What do you think about our president's opinion on refugees? Don't you think that it is quite embarrassing for us as a nation?
Yeah, I think it's embarrassing. Yeah.
So thank you for your answers. Do you have any questions, remarks? If not, so thank you very much for excellent presentation. And Mr. Rector can.
So thank you very much. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Oh. No. Oh, wow. Thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Last option.
No, it's definitely not. It was a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks. Okay, thank you all.
Thank you very much. And I think it was very, very interesting, very hot topic, very interesting presentation. And thank you for attention, for coming here, or for viewing our online section. And I wish you a nice day. Goodbye.
Goodbye, and thank you very much once again. Bye-bye.